Lisa stood at the edge of the park, her heart racing as she watched the sun dip below the horizon. The cool evening air surrounded her like a blanket, but inside she felt a fire. Her chest tightened with a mix of anger and fear. Every day was a battle for her, and today was no different. She had been working hard to make a name for herself in the tough world of marketing. She was ambitious and determined. Yet time after time, she found herself belittled, mostly by men who couldn't see past their own egos. Today, she met with Paul, a colleague who had taken it upon himself to undermine her efforts. Lisa had prepared a great presentation. She had poured her heart and soul into the project. The idea was innovative, and she was proud of her work. But when she arrived at the meeting room, Paul wasted no time. He started with his usual charm, complimenting her on the visuals, just before he shifted into his typical dismissive tone. "The numbers just don't add up, Lisa," he had said, waving his hand dismissively over the slides she'd worked so hard on. With each word, Lisa felt her resolve start to crumble. It was not just the words, it was the way he said them. They felt like tiny daggers aimed at her confidence. She clenched her fists, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. Anger bubbled within her, and for a moment she thought about snapping back, but the fear of being seen as overly emotional crept in. How many times had she held back? How many times had she let someone about to drown her voice? As the meeting progressed, the tension hung heavy in the air. Lisa tried to speak, to defend her ideas, but every time she opened her mouth, Paul took it as an invitation to interrupt. It felt unending, a relentless tide of words washing over her, silencing her thoughts. "Let's be real," he continued, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. He meant it to be funny, but it felt like a punch. Lisa bit her tongue, her mind racing. He was trying to belittle her. It was a strategy in the workplace. She had seen it before. If she let him, he'd win, and she couldn't let that happen. Gathering her strength, she raised her voice slightly, asserting herself. "Actually, I believe I know this market better than you do," but before she could elaborate, Paul cut her off again. Wait, did he really just say that? Her father's name? That was no longer just an attack, it was a low blow. Pain washed over her as memories flooded back. She thought of her father, a hardworking man who had always encouraged her to follow her dreams. The thought of using his name against her made her want to scream. Lisa held her breath, and the room seemed to fade away for a moment. She thought about the sacrifices her father had made for her, how he taught her to stand up for herself. He wasn't perfect, but he had always supported her. She felt a wave of hurt mixed with anger. Suddenly her emotions surged like a fierce tide crashing upon the shore. She shouted. Her voice was steady, louder than she expected. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. This was no longer just about business, this was personal. Paul raised an eyebrow, surprise etched across his face. He had not anticipated her reaction. "Oh, come on, Lisa," he said, now looking uneasy. She repeated, her voice trembling but firm. "You think it's funny to bring my family into this?" The fire in her gave her courage. With each word, she remembered why she was there today. "Enough of this, Lisa," he said, but now there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. The other colleagues in the room shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. "No, Paul," she pressed on, feeling empowered. "You don't get to dismiss me like I'm some worthless idea. All I want is a chance to prove myself." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. For the first time, Lisa felt the moment shift in her favor. The room had gone still, the tension was palpable. She glanced around, searching the faces of her colleagues. Some looked surprised, while others appeared impressed. Was it possible that she was gaining their support? "Lisa, I think we should table this discussion," one of her colleagues said, breaking the silence. His tone was gentle, yet firm, almost protective. A flicker of relief washed over her. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she needed to touch people, to remind them of the reality of her ambition. It wasn't just about her plan, it was about belief. Paul tried to regain control, but he sounded weaker now. "Let's just discuss the data and move on," he said, but Lisa could feel his bravado fading. "No, Paul," she replied, her voice steady. "We're going to change the narrative. The data isn't everything, it's about people." She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "This project isn't just numbers to me," she said, her tone softening but still firm. "It represents sleepless nights, sacrifices, and hard work, and I believe in it just as much as I believe in myself." In that moment, Lisa felt the walls around her crumble. She was no longer fighting just for her idea, but for herself. The fear that had gripped her heart began to lift. "Let's have a vote," the same colleague suggested, the room slowly humming back to life. Lisa's heart raced as everyone nodded in agreement. Paul's expression shifted from confident to flustered. He repeated, struggling to keep the upper hand, but Lisa pressed on. "No, it's not absurd. If you really believe in your perspective, a vote should be easy for you." She was exerting her strength, her voice rising with every word. "Every single idea we discuss here deserves to be heard, no matter who presents it." After a tense silence, some of her colleagues began to mumble in agreement. Lisa could see heads nodding, and it gave her the strength she needed to push forward with her passion. "All right then," Paul said finally, a hint of resignation in his voice. The tension in the room broke like a wave crashing onto a rock. One by one they raised their hands, and one by one the votes began to tally in her favor. It felt liberating, watching the numbers grow and hearing the staff support her. When the meeting ended and Lisa finally stepped out into the cool evening, her her chest swelled with pride. She had fought back, she had stood her ground, and she had won not just for her idea, but for herself. As the last rays of the sun disappeared, Lisa knew that the battle had made her stronger. She walked away feeling lighter, filled with more determination than ever before. She realized that raising her voice wasn't just about shouting louder, it was about making herself heard. It was about claiming her space in a world that often tried to silence women like her. Her father had always reminded her that speaking up was the first step in making change happen. She thought of him as she took each step away from that conference room. She was no longer just Lisa, the daughter. She was Lisa, a force to be reckoned with. And as she walked toward her next adventure, she felt the weight of responsibility resting warmly on her shoulders. Today wasn't just a victory, it was a reminder that her voice mattered, and it always would. The room was filled with laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses as the company's annual holiday party kicked into full swing. Lisa stood at the edge, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching as the crowd unfolded like a parade of polished smiles and easy camaraderie. But inside, she was coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. Just a year ago, she had been the new kid on the block, eager to prove herself in the bustling world of marketing. A flood of emotions washed over her: excitement, apprehension, a flicker of hope. Tonight should have felt like a celebration of progress, yet all she could focus on was the knot in her stomach as Paul Johnson breezed by, the golden boy of their department. Tall, charismatic, and arrogant, he was the king of casual confidence, and he always seemed to have it out for her. Their last meeting still echoed in her mind, a painful cacophony of dismissive comments and smirks designed to cut her down. He had laughed, his eyes glinting with condescension. Even then, despite the fervor she felt for her pitch, she had felt smaller under his gaze. But what happened next at the party would change everything for Lisa. As she stood quietly at the edge of the room, she suddenly felt a hand grip her shoulder. She turned to find Rachel, her supportive colleague, beaming at her. She urged, pulling Lisa into the heart of the gathering. For a moment, Lisa felt a rush of warmth, surrounded by coworkers who genuinely cared. They discussed the latest campaigns, swapping ideas and laughter. But across the room, like a dark cloud looming on the horizon, Paul slithered closer, casting a shadow. He called out loud enough for the group to hear. Everyone turned. Lisa's heart hopped into her throat, her cheeks warming as she fought the urge to retreat. "Actually, I happen to think it's a solid idea," she shot back, feeling the rush of words spill out of her. She was taken aback by her own bravery. Paul smirked, leaning back in his chair like a predator sizing up its prey. The tension in the room thickened. Whispers flickered through the crowd. Lisa's heart sank as his words did their damage, slicing through the earnestness she had built up. Everyone knew her father, a well-respected figure in their industry. It was a point of pride for her, but Paul had twisted that into a weapon. He was weaponizing her background, diminishing her efforts to nothing more than the privileges she had inherited. It felt cruel, and it struck a nerve deep within her. Surrounded by a circle of colleagues, she felt herself shrink. The laughter faded, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that hung like a blade over her. But then the tide started to turn. Lisa dug deep and stood higher. "My father's name doesn't define me," she said, her voice gaining strength. Paul raised an eyebrow, his smile betraying disbelief. "Prove it, really? You think you can take on the big shots with a few charming slides?" The laughter rippled through the group, an echo that tried to drown her out. But in that moment, something clicked inside her. She thought of all the late nights, the early mornings filled with brainstorming alone in her apartment, the countless hours spent polishing her presentation. She thought of the inspiring words her father had always shared about believing in oneself, about the power of determination. "Just because I'm a woman in this field doesn't mean I can't succeed," she spat, her voice sharp and unwavering. Surprise flickered across Paul's face. He hadn't expected that, and neither did anyone else in the room. But she saw the challenge linger in his eyes. He wanted to push her. He leaned in slightly, his tone suddenly mocking. "You're just emotional because you extend your father's name like a safety net. A bet." Facial expressions shifted. People leaned in closer, curiosity peaked. She heard murmurs of anticipation faintly behind her, but all she could focus on was the burning sensation in her chest. She asked slowly, feeling the needling hesitation dance in her mind. "You put together a proper pitch, one that impresses me, not just with your slides, but with real, viable ideas." Paul's grin stretched wide, a wolf preying on a rabbit. That was it. Anger coursed through her like wildfire. How dare he? Asked, finding a strength she didn't know she had. He laughed, looking around at the crowd who were starting to feel the tension build again. The crowd murmured again, tension bubbling beneath the surface. A pause lingered, long and heavy, and then with a breath that tasted like determination, she decided to take the plunge. "Fine." Gasps filled the area as her heart pounded in her ears. Would she be able to pull this off? Her mind raced, calculating the risks, but the thought of letting Paul win was unbearable. She needed to use this as a chance to show everyone, not just him, but herself, that she belonged here. As the party continued around them, Lisa felt the resolve settle in. The laughter and music faded into the background as she envisioned her pitch. She would show Paul and she would show herself. Every night became a storm of ideas. She spent hours dissecting marketing strategies, looking into data models, and mapping out bold plans. The doubts nagged at her, but each time they crept in, she remembered the laughter in that crowded room and how she had stood up for herself. Weeks passed. Each day went a little faster than the last, and yet the energy of apprehension and determination grew stronger inside her. She felt like a seed buried deep in the ground, but she was pushing upward through layers of soil, seeking out the sunlight. Finally, the day arrived when they would present their pitches. Lisa sat at the long table in the conference room, facing Paul and the other board members. Her hearing heightened as the clock ticked loudly in the background, each second marking the importance of her moment. Paul was the first to present. He spoke confidently, gliding through his slides. His tone was relaxed as he outlined his predictable ideas. He exuded that same charm that had once intimidated her, but tonight she saw right through it. She could almost feel his smirk of satisfaction as he finished and turned to her. "All right, Lisa, let's see what you've got," he said. Taking a deep breath, she rose to her feet, shaking off the nerves. The room felt electric as she began. Lisa felt her voice rise, words flowing like a river as she detailed her innovative campaign, rich with data points and vibrant visuals that captured their attention. With each passing slide, the whispers grew quieter, the intrigue building like a crescendo. She watched their faces closely, the flicker of surprise, the nods of approval. She could almost hear her heart pounding in her ears, but it was a steady rhythm. It fueled her determination. Then came the moment. Unbeknownst to her, moments like these could tilt the room entirely. She leaned forward, locking eyes with Paul. This concept isn't just built on data, it's built on understanding our audience. The nods around the room intensified, a wave of affirmation washing over her. Paul shifted uncomfortably, his facade crumbling ever so slightly. "And while my father's name might get a few raised eyebrows, it doesn't overshadow the years of experience I have put into this project," she finished, her voice ringing with clarity. Silence fell over the room, heavy and charged with energy. She could sense the turning tide. When she finished, the applause erupted, echoing through the vast conference room. Lisa felt a rush of exhilaration, an overwhelming tide of relief as she realized she had done it. Paul sat back, disbelief washed over his features. The challenging smirk had faded off his face. Now he looked unsure, perhaps even a little afraid. His laughter from weeks ago seemed distant, replaced by the truth she had finally unveiled. The board members began to engage, questions bubbling forth, ideas sparking like fireworks. She answered each inquiry with poise and conviction, growing more confident as she fought through the barrage of curiosity. They were no longer simply evaluating her pitch, they were discussing genuine interest. Finally, as they wrapped up the meeting, she caught a glimpse of Paul. His earlier confidence vanished. He looked shaken, his attempts to regain composure that day futile. The announcement came, and amidst cheers and acknowledgement of her prowess, she felt like she had won not just the pitch, but something much greater. As she stepped out of that conference room into the whisper of the evening air, sunlight flickered in the distance. The hustle of the outside world buzzed around her, a stark contrast to the stillness in her heart. She had raised her voice, stood her ground, and ultimately, she had defined her own path. Lisa thought of all the moments that had led her here, every sacrifice, every doubt. She was not just a name in her father's legacy, she was Lisa, a name that would stand on its own. And as she walked forward into her future, she made a promise to herself: no one would ever diminish her voice again. She refused to let anyone silence her potential. There was power in standing up for oneself, and that power was hers to own. The room was thick with tension, and all eyes turned to Lisa as she stood at the front, her heart racing. The annual sales meeting had never felt so intimidating. She was about to pitch her latest marketing idea, one she had slaved over for months, when the door swung open and Paul strolled in casually, late as usual. With a confident smirk, he took his place at the table, and Lisa's stomach twisted into knots. Her hands gripped the edges of the podium, nails digging into the wood as she prepared to present. Paul had a presence, a swagger that could easily fill a room. He was the kind of guy people gravitated toward, his charm like a magnet. But Lisa had worked hard to earn her spot here, and she wasn't about to let him overshadow her. As she clicked to the first slide, setting the tone for her pitch, she felt a bead of sweat trickle down her back. "Good morning, everyone. Today I want to share a strategy that I believe will boost our engagement with younger audiences," she began, her voice steady but full of the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. Paul leaned back, folding his arms with a bored expression. His eyes flickered over the presentation, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "You really think this will work?" Lisa clenched her jaw, forcing herself to maintain composure. "Understand the challenge, but I've done extensive research," he cut her off. "Research, like how you leaned on your father to get into this company." At those words, the room quieted. Lisa felt the air escape her lungs, the sting of embarrassment flooding her cheeks. Her father's name, spoken as if it were curse, hung in the air like a dark cloud. It wasn't the first time someone had taken a jab at her connections, but something about the way Paul delivered it made her blood boil. She shot back. The tremor in her voice surprised even herself, but that flicker of anger ignited something inside her fire that demanded to be recognized. Paul scoffed, the corner of his mouth curling into a smirk. "Oh, come on, everyone knows you're just here because of him." A wave of heat washed over her, but beneath it lay a cold determination. She was more than just her father's daughter. She had spent countless nights working, gaining expertise, pushing her own limits to prove herself in a competitive world. With every ounce of courage she could muster, Lisa took a step forward. The words erupted from her, filling the room with a strength she hadn't realized was there. Time seemed to freeze. The room felt like an arena, and she had thrown down the gauntlet. Lisa could feel eyes wide with surprise, even a hint of admiration from a few of her colleagues. Paul's expression faltered, uncertainty flickering in his confident facade. "Fine," he said, leaning forward, his tone shifting from mocking to challenging. "Let's make it interesting. If you truly believe in your pitch, let's do a little bet. Put your ideas on the line. If you can convince the board after this presentation, I'll back you. But if you fail..." The stakes felt dangerously high, but something deep inside her roared in defiance. The words slipped out before she could reconsider. She was ready to face this challenge, not just for her idea, but to reclaim her own identity. As Lisa continued her presentation, the anger fueling her, she noticed a shift in the energy of the room. Maybe it was the fire in her eyes, or perhaps it was the unexpected confidence in her voice. For the first time, she felt she was not just an employee, but a force to be reckoned with. Her ideas flowed like water, painting a vibrant picture of what the campaign could look like. The board listened intently, their eyes glued to her rather than her slides. She wrapped up with a compelling call to action, and to her surprise, the silence that followed didn't feel oppressive. Instead, it felt electric. "Well," someone finally said, breaking the stillness, "that was unexpected." The board members began to murmur amongst themselves, deliberating her proposal. Lisa's heart raced, a mixture of hope and anxiety spiraled within her as she glanced at Paul, awaiting his reaction. "Not bad, Lisa," he offered, still trying to regain control of the narrative, "but good enough to make us change our course." And just like that, she was back in the ring. "You may think so, Paul," she replied, holding his gaze. "But this idea isn't just about winning over the folks in this room. It's about understanding and connecting with our audience." Paul squinted, a flash of something darkening his expression. "Let's not get emotional here. Marketing is about numbers." In that moment, she felt the energy shift again. She had to dig deeper, find a way to turn his doubts into opportunities. I've researched recent trends showing that younger consumers value authenticity over traditional marketing tactics." With every word, she could see the board's engagement grow. Rather than just backing away in doubt, Lisa was ready to confront the challenge head-on. Each argument she presented strengthened her resolve, turning the tide in the room. But it wasn't just about the pitch anymore. She was fighting for her right to have a voice. This was about more than just marketing strategies. It was about equality, about respect, and about erasing the undercurrent of dismissal that had defined her presence up until that moment. As the discussion unfolded, she noticed Paul's confidence wavering. His attempts to undermine her ideas fell flat as the board increasingly sought clarification and asked probing questions. Lisa met them with poise, ready to defend her vision. By the time the session concluded, everyone in the room had shifted. The applause was genuine, ringing through the air like a declaration of independence. Lisa felt a wave of relief crash over her as she joined in the collective praise of her hard work. She had done it, no father's name needed. Paul's voice called out, trying to reclaim some semblance of authority. In that instant, Lisa locked her gaze on him, the fire still smoldering within her. "You can't diminish this moment by trying to turn it against me." The tension was palpable, and she dared to smile, feeling the strength swelling in her chest. "Looks like you've lost, Paul," one of the board members chimed in, an approving nod following. The murmurs of agreement swept through the room like a gentle breeze, and for the first time Paul appeared to be at a loss. Watching him sulk, the victory felt sweeter, not just for the pitch, but for the battle she had fought within herself, claiming her rightful place. The aftermath of that meeting couldn't be understated. Her colleagues approached her, smiles spreading across their faces. They hailed her a hero, excited about her ideas, the very ideas Paul had undermined so easily. But Lisa's heart burned with an even greater excitement. Her passion hadn't just won respect, it had forged friendships that would change the way she felt in the workplace. As she walked out of the building that evening, the sunlight glowing softly on the horizon, she felt renewed. The world outside was bright and full of possibilities. The voice that had trembled moments ago was now loud and clear, filled with conviction. That moment had changed her, not just as an employee, but as a person commanding her own identity. She thought of her father, the man who had always told her to stay true to herself, to believe in her worth. She felt a rush of gratitude, not just for the lessons he had imparted, but for the strength she had found by confronting those uncomfortable truths. No longer would she let anyone use her name to undermine her achievements. She was Lisa, a name that would echo in this company for years to come, not just as someone who rose under the wings of her father, but as a strong voice of her own. With each step forward, she felt lighter. She was ready for whatever challenge would come next. She had found her voice powerful, fierce, and unyielding. and she wouldn't let anyone take that away again. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension, as Lisa took a deep breath. It was the annual company conference, and today was her moment to shine. She had spent weeks preparing for this presentation, pouring her heart into a marketing campaign that she believed could change everything for her company. But as she looked around the room, her palms began to sweat. Through the sea of faces, she spotted Paul. The way he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, with that infuriating smirk on his face, made her heart race for a different reason. Paul was the golden boy of the company, bright, charming, and always just a little smug, and he had never hesitated to remind everyone that he was the one who called the shots. Lisa set her sights on the projector screen, her mind racing. The presentation was flawless. She had designed engaging slides filled with strategies that promised to ignite interest among their younger target audience. But she knew better than to underestimate the power of Paul's words, especially when he could belittle her efforts with a single glance. "All right, everyone, let's get started," Lisa said, her voice steady, though her heart beat like a drum in her chest. She clicked the button and her first slide appeared. Paul leaned forward slightly, eyeing her with the same condescending gaze he always wore. "Let's see what you've got," he said, almost too casually. The moment had come. As she began to speak, words flowed out like a river. Lisa spoke passionately about her research and the innovative ideas she had crafted. Her slides showcased graphics that highlighted actual data, appealing trends, and fresh strategies. She felt herself gaining momentum, the tide of doubt receding. But then Paul raised a hand, interrupting her. "Hold on, Lisa. This all sounds great in theory, but do you really think young consumers care about marketing ploys? What's your track record?" The room went quiet. All eyes turned toward her and a lump formed in her throat. Did he really just question her qualifications? Anger simmered below the surface, fighting against the vulnerability creeping up. "I've worked hard for my role here, Paul. I've been studying the market trends for years now, and I know what resonates with our audience." He chuckled, the sound dripping with disbelief. "Oh, come on, let's be real. The only reason you're here is because of your father." A gasp rippled through the room, but the shock shifted quickly to a tense silence. Those words hit her like a physical blow. Her father, a respected executive in the business world. Whenever he was mentioned, it felt like the ground under her feet trembled. "Don't bring my father into this," she snapped, her heart racing. "Judging my work based on my family isn't just unfair, it's frankly disrespectful." Paul smirked again, tilting his head as if she were a petulant child. "Is that so? Well, if you're so confident, why don't we make this interesting? Let's say if you can convince the board today, I'll back you up." A hush fell over the gathering. Time stood still as Lisa processed his words. The challenge, the stakes, it all seemed absurd and yet ominously real. Was she really willing to risk her credibility to prove herself against him? Deep down, she knew she couldn't back down now. She had to confront him. The word left her lips before she had a chance to reconsider. As she resumed her presentation, the fiery resolve settled in her chest. She had been preparing her entire life for this moment, not just to convince the board of her brilliant ideas, but to reclaim her identity, to prove that she was worthy on her own merit. "Let's talk about engagement," Lisa continued, her tone sharper now. Each slide brought new data, new connections proving why her ideas matter. She outlined youthful trends and reflected a changing market. As she spoke, she could see some board members nodding along. Fueled by the fire inside her, she took calculated risks. If Paul thought he could knock her down, she would rise. Lisa shared stories of successful brands that reached out and connected with their audience in real, meaningful ways. The energy in the room shifted, and she could feel the tide turning in her favor. "Marketing isn't just data and numbers," she pressed on, her voice rising with conviction. "It's about creating authentic connections." But Paul wasn't giving up easily. He challenged. In that moment, she knew she had to push harder, to dig deep. "The market is shifting, Paul. Brands that can't adapt will fall behind." Her passion transformed the room's atmosphere. Formerly tense, now inches away from buzzing with excitement, her colleagues were fine-tuned in. Lisa felt a presence, a subtle strength carrying her forward as she maintained eye contact with the board. She was digging deep into her reserves, and they were responding. But just as she could see victory on the horizon, Paul leaned in again, this time more menacing, eyes narrowing. "You're just emotional because of your father's connections. What you don't realize is that this is not a game you're playing with your career." She felt the rage bubble up again, a familiar flame igniting beneath the skin. "Using my father's name as a weapon is weak. You think my worth comes from him? I've earned my place here." Silence enveloped the space, but it was different this time. The weight of her words settled across them, shifting perceptions. "Think about it, Paul," she said. "If you were in my shoes, would you want to be defined by your father?" Lisa noticed a flicker of uncertainty in Paul's eyes, a crack in his confidence. He was trying too hard to control the narrative, but she was no longer afraid. The stakes were high, but in the heat of the moment she felt liberated. "I want to be seen for who I am, not just who I come from." The applause rang out before she even finished speaking. A spontaneous reaction, the applause had started tentatively but quickly transformed into a roar of support. She turned quickly to the board members, who were now leaning in, intrigued. Let's put this to vote, one board member suggested, and the energy in the room buzzed like electricity. The moment shifted dramatically, and even Paul couldn't hide his discomfort. The audience was engaged, and they were beginning to realize the power of Lisa's voice. This was a woman who refused to bow down, who had found her strength in calling out injustice. "Okay, everyone, we've heard Lisa's pitch," the board member asked, raising his hands. Lisa could barely breathe as hands shot up one by one, signaling support and approval. She watched the numbers soar, the tide shifting entirely. Paul glanced from the board to Lisa, shock painted across his face. No longer the centerpiece of attention, he had become just another voice among many. After the vote was tallied, the board turned to her. "Congratulations, Lisa. You've won this round." The rush of victory coursed through her. She had done it. She had carved a path not only for herself but for women like her who felt overshadowed by others. The noise faded in the background, leaving her with just the rush of emotion and a heartbeat of liberation. "Looks like you'll have to reckon with the truth now," Lisa said, turning to Paul, a grin dancing on her lips. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words failed him. Instead, he stepped back, retreating into silence. The confidence he once wielded like a sword had evaporated, replaced by a bitter realization that Lisa was not to be underestimated. The room began to clear as people congratulated her, excitement buzzing in the air. Lisa felt a sense of warmth, camaraderie building around her as voices lifted hers in celebration. She was no longer alone in the fight. She had the support of allies, colleagues who recognized her worth. As the meeting came to a close and she stepped outside, the sunlight poured over her like a warm embrace. The moment had transformed her. She had raised her voice not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced. Walking down the street, she heard the city alive with the sounds of busy life. Cars zipped by, laughter floated through the air, and the warmth of day filled her lungs. She had earned her place and reclaimed her identity, freed from the constricting tag of her father's name. Underneath all of it was a promise to never let her voice be drowned out again. A promise that she would keep pushing boundaries. Lisa knew this was just the beginning. And as she walked toward her future, she felt a lightness in her heart that opened up new possibilities, new dreams to dream. She would not be just another name. She was Lisa, a voice strong enough to inspire change. No one could take that away. Lisa stood backstage, her heart pounding as she adjusted her blouse for what felt like the 100th time. The conference hall buzzed with energy, and the anticipation of an audience was palpable, like static in the air. As she peered out from behind the curtain, she could see the rows of chairs filled with eager faces, a mix of colleagues, executives, and even a few clients. This was her moment. The spotlight wasn't just on her. It was a chance to challenge the stigma that had shadowed her for years. This wasn't just a presentation. It was her chance to carve out her name in a world where she often felt like a footnote. Just then she heard his voice, a smooth, confident drawl that twisted her stomach into knots. Paul was weaving through the crowd, laughter bubbling up from him like a fountain. Light-hearted and charming, he had a knack for commanding attention. And he always seemed to take a special interest in undermining her. "Hey everyone," he called out as he strolled up to the front of the stage. The audience chuckled, their attention shifting toward him. Lisa felt her breath hitch. Didn't he have enough spotlight? With an enthusiastic grin, Paul turned to her. His tone dripped with sarcasm, the kind meant to slice right through her confidence. She swallowed hard, pulling herself into focus. "Yeah, I'm ready," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. She stepped out from behind the curtain, the warm glow of the stage lights washing over her. As she started her presentation, Lisa fought to ignore the prickle of anxiety. She clicked to the first slide and launched into her pitch, highlighting the innovative ideas she had developed. She described how brands had to adapt to engage a generation that craved authenticity and connection. As she spoke, she could see nods from some of the executives. They were listening. It felt exhilarating at first, a comforting affirmation that her hard work might pay off. But then Paul leaned forward, a smirk on his face. He interrupted, his tone playful yet cutting. The laughter rippled through the audience and Lisa's heart sank. It was like a punch to her gut. Memories flooded back, those moments in meetings where her work was dismissed, her ideas ignored, simply because she was the daughter of a prominent business figure. Gritting her teeth, she shot back, "I believe in this strategy, Paul." She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. "Believe all you want," he replied, the smirk lingering. "But let's face it, you're here because of your father." A low murmur echoed through the crowd. The words were familiar, yet they stung with a fresh intensity. How many times had she fought against that narrative? The stereotype of being the privileged daughter, the expectation that her father's name would carry her. "Don't bring my father into this," she shot back, her voice trembling with anger. "I worked hard to get here." Paul shrugged, nonchalant. "Sure, but let's be honest, how much of your success is really you?" At that moment, it felt like the whole room teetered on a precipice. Lisa's heart raced, each beat spurring her on. She knew this wasn't just about her pitch, it was about respect. It was about standing up for herself. She proposed, her pulse quickening. "If I can display the value of my proposal today, you'll have to acknowledge that I didn't just ride my father's coattails." She paused to let the gravity of her challenge settle in. "You can tell everyone who doubts me that I deserve it." The room was charged with tension. Some shifted in their seats, others leaned forward, intrigued. Paul raised an eyebrow, and just for a moment, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. As she continued her presentation, something inside Lisa shifted. The fear that had once gripped her began to loosen its hold. This was her opportunity, not just to prove herself against Paul, but to reclaim her voice, to redefine herself not as someone's daughter, but as a talented professional. The presentation flowed, with each slide displaying her passion. She outlined strategies that broke from traditional norms, emphasizing an authentic connection with consumers. The data backed her ideas, and she could feel her confidence growing with every word, but Paul wasn't finished. As she wrapped up, he leaned in again. "Let's go back to that little bet you made." "Let's find out," she replied with newfound conviction. The room buzzed with energy, her colleagues engaged in the unfolding drama. One of the board members finally spoke up. "Lisa, let's hear more about how you plan to implement this strategy." Time seemed to fly as she dove deep into specifics, outlining campaigns she'd studied that resonated well with younger generations. She explained how they favored brands that demonstrated genuine social responsibility and transparency. With each passing moment, the room took notice. Paul's expression morphed from amusement to concern as the executives' attention shifted. They didn't just hear her, they were leaning into her words, starting to see the potential in her ideas. As she spoke, Lisa began to feel an undeniable current growing between her and the audience. There was something powerful about taking control of her narrative, slashing down the walls that surrounded her identity. She could see the board whispering among themselves, their interest piqued. Then without warning, Paul leaned back, legs crossed, a nullified expression on his face. He drawled, a hint of worry creeping into his tone. The room fell silent. Lisa felt a rush of frustration mixed with courage, rising like a tidal wave. "My father's name isn't the crutch I need. This isn't about him, this is about me, my work, my ideas, my determination." With that, something shifted in the room. Those who had looked at her with judgment now leaned forward, their expressions morphing into curiosity and respect. "I'm not just asking for a chance, I'm demanding to be seen," Lisa declared, her voice unwavering. "I won't be the person you dismiss because of my family name." Lisa could see heads nodding in agreement. For the first time, she felt like she was not alone. The affirmation fueled her passion even further. She was no longer just fighting Paul, she was fighting for everyone who had been silenced. The moment hung suspended in the air. Lisa knew she was on the brink of something special. Finally, as she concluded her presentation, applause erupted in the room, punctuated by enthusiastic cheers. The warmth of approval washed over her, and she felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. She had done it. She had raised her voice, and it had been heard. Paul's expression was blank, caught somewhere between disbelief and incredulity. The laughter he had invoked earlier now danced in the air, fueling her victory. "Let's take a vote," one of the board members announced, and it felt like destiny unfolding. The weight of approval was upon her. As hands were raised in support of her proposal, she felt a surge of triumph. Each hand was a testament to her hard work, her dedication, and her refusal to be limited by her father's name. Paul's bravado crumbled, a look of regret etched across his face as he glanced over the board members, a group who had chosen to believe in Lisa. Someone shouted from the audience, and the cheer took on a life of its own, an infectious wave of enthusiasm. As the meeting wrapped up and she stepped off the stage, a flood of colleagues surrounded her. Their excitement burst forth as they praised her innovative ideas, the very ideas Paul had tried to dismiss. Walking out into the sunlight, Lisa felt an exhilarating rush. She had fought for her voice, and she had won not just a pitch but a fight against an identity shaped by someone else's expectations. The harsh glare of the day felt like a warm embrace, and she breathed deep, savoring that newfound freedom. No longer was she just Lisa, the daughter of a prominent executive. She was Lisa, a professional. She was a voice that mattered. The journey hadn't been easy, with shadows haunting her at every turn, but now that darkness felt like it was lifting, revealing a path lined with possibilities. As she walked through the bustling streets, each step resonated with purpose. She felt a profound sense of pride, not just for winning the pitch, but for standing her ground. The battle had been fierce, but it had forged her into something stronger than she imagined she could be. In the days that followed, Lisa's proposal was officially adopted. It was implemented with roaring success, bringing in new customers, increasing engagement, and highlighting the very authenticity she had argued for. And with each piece of positive feedback, another brick fell from the walls that had once confined her. Paul, however, was a different story. Though he continued to work at the company, he seemed to tread carefully around her. The days of his mocking had faded into whispers, and the air changed as others stood by Lisa's side. That atmosphere of support felt intoxicating, a sweet reprieve from what had once been constant doubt. One afternoon, Lisa found herself sipping coffee with Rachel, a supportive colleague who had cheered her on throughout the presentation. "I'm so proud of you, Lisa. You changed the narrative," Rachel said, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "Thanks, Rachel," interrupted gently. "You've always had it in you." A pause fell between them, words unsaid hanging in the air. Lisa felt that familiar warmth swell in her chest, the affirmation they had created together. That spark of camaraderie reminded her that she was no longer alone in this fight. However, there was still work to do. She couldn't shake the shadow of that first encounter with Paul. Though he had retreated, she wanted to ensure that truth and respect became the foundation of their workplace. If she was to lead, she would have to help others share their voices as well. Determined, Lisa decided to organize a workshop where everyone could pitch their ideas, the shy ones, the overworked, even those who felt silenced. She believed that fostering an inclusive environment could pave the way for innovation, allowing every voice to be celebrated, much like her own had been. Each week, as the workshop unfolded, Lisa marveled at the transformation. Colleagues who once sat in silence began to blossom, sharing grateful smiles and eager ideas. They rallied around each other, encouraging one another to take risks, to step beyond limits, and to raise their voices. But as the sparkle of success shone bright, she couldn't ignore the flicker of anxiety that still crept in when she saw Paul. Would he ever acknowledge his part in her growth? Would he change? One afternoon, they crossed paths in the break room, stirring her coffee. Paul walked in, a familiar bravado swirling around him like an old coat. "Hey, Lisa," he said, his tone surprisingly relaxed. Caught off guard, Lisa looked up, weighing his words with caution. "Thanks, Paul, it's been a lot of hard work," she responded coolly, refusing to let down her guard. "Seriously, though, I didn't think you could pull it off," he admitted, a hint of vulnerability cutting through his bravado. "I guess I underestimated you. I'm sorry for, everything I said back there." The sincerity hung in the air, a startling contrast to their previous encounters. Lisa blinked, grappling with her emotions. Was he genuinely changing? "You really embarrassed me back there," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop. "But maybe I needed that push to realize my worth." Paul looked down, a shadow of understanding crossing his face. "I get that. I didn't appreciate how much it mattered to you. I guess I figured that using your father's name as a shot would undermine you." Lisa nodded, the tension easing, a bridge being built where only conflict had existed before. "I had to find my voice in a room where people wouldn't listen." Paul shifted, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "That's good. I'd like to help too, if that's okay. I can't promise I'll change overnight, but maybe there's something we can do together." And just like that, something began to shift. The divide between them, created over harsh words and ignorance, started to fade. Lisa felt the hallmarks of their dynamic tumble against the weight of possibility. The following weeks, the workshops flourished, both pushing boundaries and unlocking hidden talents. And with Paul's unexpected support, the initiative grew even larger. The space became a sanctuary where everyone felt valued, heard, and inspired. Unexpected friendships sprouted and collaboration thrived. As the project took off, Lisa often reflected on their initial clash. She realized that every doubt cast was a catalyst for growth. Every word spoken with disdain had pushed her to confront her own identity and claw her way back to her power. One evening, as the sun set behind the skyline, she found herself outside the office with Rachel. "I never thought I could feel so liberated at work," she said, smiling as she watched the sunset paint the city. Rachel agreed, her eyes sparkling. "You broke through your barriers and showed everyone what was possible, and all those who followed your lead are doing the same." Overwhelmed with gratitude, she looked back at the office from which so much had changed. The victories, both personal and collective, had reignited her passion for not just her career, but for championing the voices around her. Weeks turned into months, and before they knew it, Lisa had firmly established herself within the company. She was no longer defined by who her father was, but by the impact she made. The whispers had been replaced with understanding, respect, and a collaborative spirit that propelled them all forward. Yet, as she continued to grow, Lisa understood the importance of embracing vulnerability. Forging ahead meant acknowledging past struggles, the potency that still existed behind every whisper and every doubt. It was through this understanding that she approached Paul one last time to celebrate their successes. "Thank you for helping me find my footing, Paul," she said as they clinked glasses filled with sparkling cider during their first company-wide celebration. He smiled, leaning back a little. "And you reminded me just how powerful potential can be when it's given room to breathe." As the night carried on, laughter and joy filled the air. Sweeps of evolution and empowerment sculpted every interaction. She was no longer just Lisa, the daughter of someone significant, but Lisa, a passionate professional unafraid to face challenges head-on. No longer would the mention of her father evoke a sense of embarrassment. Instead, it would remind her of the journey, the struggles, and the strength of a voice raised in defiance. And as she stepped out under the stars that night, she understood. She had not only found her voice, but had lifted others to theirs as well. This was just the beginning of a beautiful journey, a path illuminated by shared strength, resilience, and unity. In the shadows of doubt and disdain, she had emerged, unbroken and ready to continue changing her world, one voice at a time. The room buzzed with anticipation. Lisa stood backstage, her heart racing. The annual corporate conference was about to begin, and she was about to present a project she had poured her soul into for months. Just beyond the curtain, she could hear the murmur of voices, the excitement, the nerves, the camaraderie of colleagues. But among those voices, one stood out like a dark cloud. Paul, the golden boy of the department, with an effortless charm that could spark laughter or unfurl disdain. He had a way of making you feel like you were in the ring with a heavyweight boxer, and today she had no doubt he'd be swinging. As she took a deep breath and adjusted her blouse, Lisa took a moment to ground herself. She felt the weight of the stage, the spotlight, and the eyes of the audience settling on her. It wasn't just about the presentation, it felt like a fight for her identity. A voice bellowed from the front of the room. The CEO's enthusiastic greeting jolted her back to reality. Lisa's stomach twisted as she stepped into the spotlight, the warm lights blinding her for a moment. She clicked to her first slide, showcasing colorful graphics that highlighted her research. "Thank you for having me today," she began, her voice steady. As she spoke, Lisa could see Paul in the corner, arms crossed, his smirk barely concealed. She forged ahead, pouring every ounce of passion and preparation into her pitch. She talked about shifting trends, the importance of brand authenticity, and the value of meaningful connections with consumers. Research shows that Gen Z prioritizes brands that reflect their own values. They want to feel connected, not sold to. Just as she felt the momentum building, Paul leaned in, amplifying his presence with a single dismissive comment. "But can you really engage that audience? I mean, do you have any experience beyond just being?" The laughter that bubbled from some corners of the room clawed at her. The murmuring quieted, but that laughter echoed sharply in her ears. For a moment, the air in the room seemed thick, as if all eyes had turned to her, measuring her worth based on her family name rather than her own efforts. She asked, the bite of indignation lacing her voice, but the sting of his comment still lingered, wrapping around her like a shroud. "Really? Are you sure? Because when I think of you, all I see is your father's name," Paul taunted, leaning back with that cavalier confidence. Something cracked inside her. Anger bubbled to the surface, igniting a fire she didn't know she had. "Let's make a bet," she proposed, surprising herself. "If I can convince the board of my strategy today, you'll acknowledge that I earned my place." The room fell silent, the stakes hanging in the air like a weighty silence before a storm. He challenged, eyebrow raised. "Yes," she replied, feeling a surge of adrenaline. As she resumed her presentation, gripping the podium tightly, the words flowed from her like a river breaking free. Lisa spoke passionately about trust, integrity, and the evolving landscape of marketing. With each point she made, she could feel the tide shifting just slightly, but enough for her to sense hope. Building a brand isn't just about reaching audiences, she emphasized, her voice growing stronger. It's about telling a story, creating a relationship where consumers feel respected and valued. Paul shifted in his seat, expression turning thoughtful for a brief moment, but Lisa pressed on, her resolve doubling. She pulled forth examples of brands that had successfully engaged with Gen Z, eager to prove that the connection mattered deeply. "We can create campaigns that resonate," she stated, locking eyes with the board members, "but we have to be willing to listen, to adapt." She could feel the audience's interest shifting, even as Paul tried to regain control of the conversation. "But Lisa, can you really guarantee that this will work?" She retorted, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, feeling electric. The murmurs of the board members grew louder, intrigued by her passion. As her presentation continued, Lisa caught glimpses of heads nodding, smiles creeping into corners of lips where doubt had previously reigned. The atmosphere changed, it felt charged, like a storm before it broke. "Let's focus on the bigger picture," she continued, closing in on her conclusion. "This isn't just about one campaign." With those words, she felt the room electrified. "Wow," someone whispered from the back. "Let's put it to vote," one of the board members suggested boldly. The room erupted into murmurs again, but this time they were supportive, charged with energy. As hands shot up in favor of her proposal, Lisa felt a sense of triumph swell within her, each hand raised not just for her idea but against the stigma of her name, against the assumptions that had plagued her journey. Paul's facade began to crack, disbelief creeping into his confident smirk as he shifted uncomfortably. Reality was slapping him hard. "Looks like you've got some real support here, Lisa," another board member noted with a smile. The applause felt like a wave crashing over her, lifting her to the surface. She had done it. As she stepped off the stage, the adrenaline still coursing through her, colleagues rushed over, congratulating her on her success. The thrill of victory warmed her heart. "Rachel," exclaimed, her friend beaming with pride. "You showed them all, Lisa." "Thanks, Rachel." But as the celebration carried on, Lisa couldn't shake off the unease of her earlier confrontation with Paul. No matter how much she had proven, his words lingered. They felt like shadows threatening to creep back in. Days passed, and as the project kicked off, Lisa couldn't shake her lingering doubts. Each time she passed Paul in the office, she braced herself for a comment, an attempt to undermine her again. Until one afternoon, when she found herself in the break room pouring coffee, Paul entered, a hesitance in his demeanor that was unlike him. "Hey, Lisa," he said, somewhat unexpectedly. Lisa turned, taking him in for the first time. The usual bravado seemed tempered now, replaced by a more vulnerable tone. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I was out of line with my comments." She blinked, caught off guard. "You're right, and I think I needed that push to see my potential," she admitted. Paul nodded slowly, acknowledging her point. "I realize that now. You were prepared." Lisa felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was the moment for change, both for her and for him. "Thank you for saying that," she said. They shared a small smile, and the tension eased between them. It was a small seed of understanding that sparked in the air. As their conversation continued, there was an odd sense of camaraderie beginning to form, two professionals willing to face their differences together. Months flew by as the project gained traction, and Paul became an unexpected ally. They collaborated effectively, trading ideas and bouncing strategies off one another. As Lisa watched, she felt the weight of doubt lift as the boundaries that had once divided them began to blur. Through this journey, she realized that raising her voice was not just about standing up to someone. It was about discovering her strength, but it was also about forging understanding through communication, allowing others to grow alongside her. One evening, as they wrapped up in the office, Paul turned to her, a sincere smile on his face. "You know, I've learned a lot working with you." "Thanks, Paul. I never thought we'd end up here, but I'm glad we did," she responded honestly, relishing the moment. As they left the office for the night, Lisa felt a sense of completion. This was the journey she had embarked upon, not just for herself, but for those who had dared to rise in the face of adversity. And as she walked through the city, lights twinkling against the night sky, she reflected on everything that had transpired. The voice she had raised had transformed not just her own future, but it had planted seeds for others in her path, forging a collective journey toward authenticity and strength. Lisa had faced down doubt, she had stood her ground, and she had found allies along the way. It was a testament to the incredible power of a voice that could resonate through barriers, lift spirits, and create space for change. And she realized as she walked under those city lights that her name was more than just a symbol of who she was. It was a beacon for others to follow. Rising voices, united in their strength, could illuminate a path that defied any expectations held against them. And that, she realized, was the beauty of being heard. The journey was far from over, it was just the beginning. The boardroom buzzed with chatter as Lisa entered, her heart pounding in rhythm with the anxious whispers filling the air. Today was a pivotal moment, not just for her career, but for her identity. She had fought tooth and nail to earn her place at this table, and now it was time to prove herself. She glanced at the long table lined with executives and peersmen in tailored suits, women with confidence etched into their expressions. But then there was Paul, already seated, lounging back in his chair with that insufferable smirk on his face. He was the golden boy, the one who always had a way of turning every situation to his advantage. Lisa fought back the unease that crept into her chest. As she approached the front, she placed her presentation on the easel. It was a culmination of months of hard work, late nights, and scrapped ideas. This was her vision, her chance to shine. She took a deep breath and called the room to attention. "Good morning, everyone." Her voice rang out, steady and clear. She clicked the remote, and the first slide lit up the screen, a vibrant display of colors and graphs. The moment she began speaking, she could feel the room's energy shift. She detailed her research on trends that showed how younger consumers valued authenticity. They craved connection, something real in a world full of advertising noise. But Paul was already waiting, feigning disinterest, twirling a pen between his fingers. He interrupted, leaning forward with that annoying ease. "Of course. It's not just about numbers, it's about creating a relationship, building trust," Lisa countered, feeling the fire inside her reignite. This was her moment, she wouldn't let him overshadow her. Paul laughed lightly, the sound dripping with condescension. "Let's be real here, you're all talk." The laughter came swiftly, a collective murmur washing over the table. Lisa felt her heart drop, the sting of his words sharp like glass. There it was again, her father's name used as a weapon against her. "Don't bring my father into this," she shot back, fists clenched, her voice quivered with suppressed rage. "I have put in the work." Paul leaned back, studying her with that same smirk. "Is that so? Because honestly, if it weren't for him, you wouldn't even be in this room." The laughter in the room grew louder, and somewhere deep within, Lisa felt herself drown in despair. The words echoed in her mind. She had worked hard, she knew that. But here was Paul, making her doubt that she could ever escape the shadow of her father's influence. With a deep breath, something shifted inside her. "Let's make this interesting," she finally said, surprising even herself. "If I can convince the board of my proposal today, you'll acknowledge that I earned my place." The room froze. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Could she really put her reputation on the line like this? Deep down, she knew she had to. "Deal," Paul replied, that infuriating cockiness back in his tone. As she resumed her presentation, the adrenaline surged through her. She couldn't back down now. She had to showcase not just her project, but her worth. "Today, I'm not just presenting a strategy." With each slide, the momentum grew. She highlighted data points that showcased how brands connecting with authenticity could see significant returns. She explained the power of storytelling in advertising, a concept she believed resonated. Lisa watched as the executives shifted their attentiveness, nodding slowly. Paul interjected again, trying to regain control. It's easier said than done, you know. The room went silent, but Lisa fought to push forward, her voice stronger than before. You're right, it's a challenge, but every successful campaign has started with a risk. Lisa felt a ripple of agreement from some of the executive board, their eyes fixed on her with newfound respect. She pressed onward, her words energized by conviction rather than fear. I believe that with the right approach, we can tap into this demographic in a way that feels authentic. The atmosphere shifted as she showcased examples of brands that had effectively engaged with younger generations. They had created genuine connections, and she could sense that the board was beginning to understand her perspective. But Paul wouldn't relent. But how can we be sure this won't backfire? In every business, there's an element of risk, Lisa countered, unwavering. But it's how we respond to those risks that define us. She finished her presentation with a resonant call to action, urging everyone in the room to imagine a future where authenticity drove their strategies. The applause that followed was surprising, an overwhelming wave of fallow support that reverberated against the walls. Lisa felt a swell of hope and triumph, catching Paul's expression from the corner of her eye. It had shifted from disbelief to astonishment. Maybe she could finally claim her place not just in the room but in her own story. All right, everyone, the CEO said, a smile on his face. Let's take a vote. Hands shot up across the room, and Lisa's heart soared with each gesture of endorsement. Even in the face of doubt, she had prevailed. She had carved out a future for herself, beyond any influences of her past. Paul sat silent, his smirk nowhere to be found. It felt surreal, almost too good to be true. She had not only won the pitch, she had disarmed the dismissive power he held over her. As the applause continued, Lisa stepped down from the podium. The exhilaration of victory flowed through her veins, and she was surrounded by colleagues congratulating her. Their smiles felt genuine, filled with pride at her success. Rachel exclaimed, throwing her arms around Lisa. But amidst the celebration, the unease of Paul's earlier words lingered. Would this really be the end of it? Was her victory just a fleeting moment? Days turned into weeks, and their marketing team began implementing her strategy. Each meeting brought its own challenges, but the camaraderie among the group felt invigorating. Lisa enjoyed working alongside those who believed in her vision rather than questioning her worth. Yet Paul's comments still echoed loudly in her mind. She often found herself glancing at him, wondering if the past would define their future. After a particularly long meeting, Lisa found herself in the break room, brewing a cup of coffee. That's when Paul appeared, hesitantly leaning against the counter. "Hey, Lisa," he said, almost sheepishly. She turned, surprised. "About what?" "I know," he said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly, "and I owe you an apology. I didn't appreciate how much effort you put into your work." The sincerity in his eyes caught her off guard. "Thank you for saying that," she replied, cautiously intrigued. "But your comments held real weight." Paul nodded, a weight of understanding settling between them. "I get that now. You've shown everyone just how much you can bring to the table." Lisa felt a softening in her chest, a shift she hadn't anticipated. "Agreed," he said, meeting her gaze earnestly. The sincerity in his offer gave her pause. "You know, I think that's a great idea." They left the break room with a tentative understanding, a bridge built over their past conflicts. In the weeks that followed, the project flourished. Paul and Lisa worked together, combining their strengths and solidifying an environment cultivating growth. The once intimidating board member was now an unexpected ally, providing valuable insights while learning to value diverse perspectives. But Lisa's journey wasn't just about her work. It was about finding her voice, stepping into her power, and fostering relationships built on mutual respect. One day, after a successful team meeting, Lisa and Paul found a moment to step out into the fresh air of the office terrace. The city stretched out before them, vibrant and alive. "I have to admit," Paul said, looking out over the skyline, "I never thought I'd say this, but working with you has been a real pleasure." "Thank you, Paul. I genuinely appreciate your support. It feels good knowing we've moved past the barriers that once held us back," she replied, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Honestly, your work has taught me so much about the value of different perspectives. Maybe we could set up a workshop, a way for everyone to present their ideas without fear of dismissal," he suggested. Lisa replied, feeling the infectious excitement build. "We could invite everyone in the company to share their thoughts." As they brainstormed together, Lisa felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. Together, they were not only transforming their work environment, but shaping the narrative around what it meant to lift others up. Months later, during another company conference, Lisa stood in the same boardroom where she once felt the weight of doubt. This time, however, it felt different. It was filled with colleagues and peers, a tapestry of diverse voices ready to be amplified. "Today, we're excited to open the floor for anyone wishing to share their ideas," she announced, looking around at familiar faces now filled with encouragement. The applause that followed was filled with anticipation, a sense of community binding them together in a way she had never imagined possible. From the back of the room, Paul raised his hand to speak, his expression sincere and supportive. The applause roared again, and Lisa felt a wave of warmth wash over her, a mixture of validation, pride, and gratitude. Later that evening, as the day wound down, Lisa stepped out into the fresh air, the sun dipping low on the horizon. She inhaled deeply, filled with a sense of accomplishment. She had raised her voice, faced down adversity, and transformed not just her own narrative, but the narratives of those around her. It was a journey of empowerment, resilience, and connection. And as she walked home, she remembered the moments of doubt and uncertainty, realizing that with each obstacle she had faced, she had built not just a path for herself, but an avenue for others to follow. No longer did her father's name haunt her. Now it was a part of her story, but not the entirety of it. She was Lisa, a force in her own right, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. In that moment, she understood. Sometimes it took raising your voice to carve a place where one could truly belong, and she was finally home. The conference room was ablaze with the chatter of anticipation, the hum of smartphones buzzing as executives settled into their seats. Lisa stood just outside the door, heart racing as she clutched a stack of notes tightly against her chest. Today was the date to finally pitch her new marketing strategy that could change everything for her company. It was her moment to shine, but with every step forward, anxiety trailed close behind. As she stepped inside, she caught sight of Paul, the confident golden boy of their department, leaning back in his chair with an easy smirk. He was the kind of guy who exuded charisma. His very presence could make or break a room. Lisa felt a tightening in her stomach. He was a formidable opponent in every sense. "All right, everyone, let's welcome Lisa to the front," the CEO announced with a warm smile, gesturing toward her. Lisa took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium, the bright lights flooding her vision. Her palms were slightly damp as she adjusted the microphone. This was it. She clicked the remote and her first slide illuminated the screen, showcasing vibrant graphics and core ideas that she believed would not only captivate but provide real value. "Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to present a marketing strategy focused on engaging our younger audience," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. As she spoke, she felt the energy shift in the room. Voices quieted and eyes began to focus on her. It was exhilarating. Lisa continued highlighting key points, case studies, audience data, and innovative ideas that could make the brand resonate deeply with its audience. But then she felt it before she heard it, a shift in the atmosphere, an almost palpable tension. Paul leaned forward, his arms crossed, eyes glinting with a challenge. "That's all great in theory, Lisa," he interjected smoothly, "but do you really think you can pull that off?" The laughter in the room felt like a physical blow. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. There it was, the name that had haunted her since she stepped foot in this industry. The laughter ricocheted off the walls, cutting through her confidence. "And here we go," she thought, an invisible boulder dropping in her chest. "Don't bring my father into this," she shot back, biting back the tremor in her voice. "I've worked hard to be here." Paul shrugged, a smirk creeping back onto his face. "Sure, but let's face it, if it weren't for your father's connections, you wouldn't even be standing here." The room settled into a heavy silence, and Lisa could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. It felt disheartening, the echo of truth laced with prejudice hitting her hard. "Let's make this interesting," she proposed, surprising even herself. "If I can convince the board of my strategy today, you'll have to acknowledge that I earned my place." Paul's eyebrow shot up, as if considering her challenge. The tension hung in the air like thick fog, but there was something empowering about what she had just said. Was she really willing to put so much on the line? "Deal," he said, leaning back with an air of cockiness enveloping him. The challenge was set, and with it, Lisa felt a surge of energy coursing through her veins. She had to rise above not just for her proposal, but for herself. She resumed her presentation with a newfound determination. "Engaging the younger demographic isn't simply about flashy ads or social media presence," she said, her confidence growing. "It's about creating authentic conversations. It's about trust." As she delved deeper into her ideas, she noticed the shift in the room. The executives were leaning in, intrigued, beginning to nod along to her points. They were listening, and with each point she made, she felt the thrill of potential fill her. But Paul wasn't finished. "You're very passionate, Lisa, but let's be realistic. Do you really have the track record to back this up? You've had every door open for you," he challenged again, voice dripping with disdain. "Well, let's talk about risk," she replied, adrenaline pumping through her. "Every successful campaign starts with taking one. Yes, I have advantages, but denying me this moment based on assumptions is just as damaging." The tension shifted again. She could feel it crackle in the air. She had turned the tables and seized back some power with those words, pushing past doubts that had rattled her. As she reached the conclusion of her presentation, her heart raced in tandem with her thoughts, each idea interwoven with the passion she had felt building up inside her. "The future of our brand relies on connectivity and authenticity." The applause that followed felt electric, as if the room was alive with newfound energy. People were standing, clapping, celebrating not just her pitch but the message behind it. She glanced toward Paul, who was looking less smug and more incredulous. "Well," the CEO said, arms crossed with an approving grin, "let's take this to a vote." Hands shot up around the room, many of them belonging to those who had once dismissed her. In that moment, Lisa felt liberated, as if a massive weight had lifted from her shoulders. As the applause continued, Paul remained silent, his expression morphing into something bewildered. She could see him questioning everything he thought he knew, the very foundation of his bravado shaken. Someone in the back shouted, and as the room erupted in cheers, she felt a rush of triumph wash over her. Minutes later, after the meeting adjourned, she felt a fierce joy embrace her. Colleagues surged around her, congratulating her on not just the success but the fight she had put up to earn it. Yet even amidst the celebration, a shadow lingered, the remnants of Paul's dismissal still echoing in the back of her mind. A smirk wiped off his face, but what if this was only the beginning? What if he turned the tides back against her? In the days that followed, as the project rolled out and gained traction, an undercurrent of unease followed Lisa. Every time she crossed paths with Paul, she braced herself for a possible comment, a dig that could cut her back down. Would this become a constant battle, a never-ending cycle of scrutiny and doubts? Then came the day when she found herself at the coffee machine, lost in thoughts about the project's progress. Lisa poured herself a cup, taking a moment to breathe, but the calm was short-lived. Paul stepped in, a somber expression on his face. He said, leaning casually against the counter, though his demeanor was anything but relaxed. She replied, wary and defensive. I just wanted to say I'm sorry about the comments I made during the presentation, he began, looking genuinely contrite. I was wrong to assume that your work was entirely dependent on your father. The honesty struck Lisa. This was unexpected. I appreciate that, Paul, but it still hurt hearing those words. Believe me, I get it, he continued. I want to move past this. Your ideas have real merit and value. I respect that now. There was a weight in his voice that felt sincere, almost as if the facade he had always upheld was crumbling, revealing something less rigid, something human. Thank you for saying that, Lisa said cautiously. As they chatted, she felt a flicker of new possibilities. Perhaps there was a chance for collaboration, after all, a joint effort to foster an environment of inclusivity rather than competition. Weeks passed, and Lisa found herself more at ease. Paul began to shift, his interactions with her transforming from rivalry into mutual respect. They started brainstorming sessions together, working through ideas and challenges, navigating the complex waters of their industry side by side. One afternoon, Lisa caught Paul genuinely listening to one of their peers, a junior employee who had proposed an innovative concept. Paul engaged him, encouraging feedback and sharing insights. Watching the transformation unfold felt gratifying. Maybe we really could change this place, she thought, excitement bubbling inside her. But just when everything seemed to be falling into place, a distraction pierced the moment. During a team meeting, a shocking announcement rolled in. The company had faced an unexpected financial hit and stakeholders were rattled. Whispers filled the air like crackling static. Cuts were imminent. The tension in the room was palpable, anxiety etched across every face. Lisa glanced around, her stomach knotting. Would her newfound triumph be overshadowed by this crisis? Paul's voice rose above the whispers. Everyone, let's stay focused. We need to address this together. If we pool our strengths, we'll be able to weather this storm, he urged, glancing at Lisa for a moment. As discussions rolled on, the stakes grew even higher. Lisa listened intently but felt her heart racing. What if my project is canceled? After the meeting, as everyone dispersed, a knot of uncertainty settled in her chest. Paul caught up to her, urgency in his voice. You can't let this discourage us, Lisa. She nodded, a flicker of hope igniting. You're right, we have to rally everyone. But just as they began to gain momentum, whispers of doubt flooded back in. Uncertainty crept into discussions about layoffs and restructuring. The air warmed with tension, fears circling like vultures. The pressure bore down on everyone. As Lisa worked late that night, she poured herself into her proposal. She thought about how the company had always been seen as a titan in the industry, and how, even in the face of adversity, they could build together and emerge stronger. With her ideas fresh in her mind, she prepared to approach the board with renewed vigor. But as she left for the day, a shadow caught her eye. Paul was standing in the hallway, deep in conversation with someone she recognized, a top executive who had once expressed skepticism about change. Her heart raced. They were discussing her project, and something about their tones felt off. As Lisa approached, she could hear snippets of their conversation. The executive laughed, Paul replied, but his voice was laced with uncertainty. What if it doesn't resonate? Lisa felt the air leave her lungs. Her pulse thrummed loudly, drowning out the noise of the world around her. The moment felt surreal, like being punched in the gut. Suddenly, the bravado that once buoyed her confidence felt like glass lips shattering under the weight of judgment. They're still doubting me, she thought, 100 emotions roiling inside her. She was just the boss's daughter again, her voice eclipsed by assumptions. And as she stood frozen in that hallway, feeling the hard truth wash over her, she realized she had a choice. She could walk away, retreat into the shadows of doubt once again, or she could confront this. She gritted her teeth, pausing for just a moment before stepping forward. The door was slightly ajar, the warmth of the light spilling into the hall. Maybe using my ideas as a last-ditch effort is exactly what this company needs, she announced, standing tall in the frame of the doorway. All eyes turned to her, shock painted across their faces. If we're going to weather this storm, we need to do it with authenticity and courage. The atmosphere shifted as Lisa stepped into the room, the unyielding strength of her voice filling the space. In that decisive moment, she felt the weight of uncertainty transform into fierce resolve. This time, she wouldn't back down. This time, she would fight for her voice and prove to them all that she was more than just a name. After all, perhaps it was only when Paul mentioned her father's influence that she would find the strength to turn the tides for everyone, including herself. And as she stood there ready to reclaim her space, the future loomed ahead, uncertain yet bursting with possibilities. Would her voice be strong enough to pave the way, or would she find her path forged anew in the fires of doubt? Only time would tell.